I mean, look, man, I'll be honest. I wanted to be like Slug. I wanted to be like Aesop Rock. I wanted to get signed. Great. I want to get signed to Rhyme Stairs or Def Jux and spend the rest of my life on tour in a van with my friends.
Pin it drop, pin it drop.
2002, you released the project Paper Animals, and this is considered one of your best projects ever, right?
Yeah, definitely. It was my debut album. Like I said, I've been on like I released an EP with the Deadly Scribes and Parts of Speech and Figurative Language that had like 3 or 4 songs of ours, I think a year prior to that. But this was the first time I'd ever done anything solo. And a lot of them were some of the first solo songs I had ever made or written. So it was all very formative for me at that point. It was really raw. I mean, I was an 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid. I had access to a studio about an hour outside the city with Josh Wan, DJ Essence, who then became him and Tim broke off and did like a Christian underground hip hop thing. It became actually very successful with that Lamp Mode recordings. And I had some beats from Jules Burns, who was like my main collaborative producer, and Skinny Friedman. And yeah, that was yeah, I mean, I did that in a summer, I think, like freshman year of college. I recorded it in a summer up there. And then Manifest Music put it out. That was a record label in Baltimore and New York City with Ben Osher and Bubs, who at that point were my managers. And yeah, they had like a really cool like art and underground hip hop magazine, and then they released like really like small indie releases. And it came out and it actually got really it got pretty positive attention. Back then hip hop infinity was a thing. This was all like the nascent time. Now the internet is starting to really like remember I was telling stories like yesterday about how there was no internet or the internet was very primitive, formative. Now the internet's starting to become a thing. So, you're starting to have these sites, undergroundhiphop.com. I mean, like it was definitely skewed towards Boston stuff because it came out of Boston. So it was like Boston, East Coast, and maybe like more established underground rap acts. Then like Hip Hop Infinity, that was maybe more my lane because it seemed to be like more Midwestern and like very indie releases, like very kind of backpack under very deep underground, extremely lyrical stuff like that. That seemed to be like who gravitated to that site. And they gave me pretty positive reviews. I forget what it is because the site's been defunct for so long. I think I got like a 4 out of 5 or 4 and change out of 5 on it or whatever. It was I got very positive feedback on it. That kind of like the beginning of me as like a solo artist.
What was the mindset that you were in when you were creating that project?
Um, I was so fresh, I just wanted to. I've been listening to a lot of great rappers. You know what I mean? And I I wanted to be one. I wanted to be a great rapper, a great lyricist, a great MC. I wanted to put out great material. I was listening to Slug, I was listening to Aesop Rock. I still listen to like stuff like Wu Tang and Nas and Cormega and stuff like that too. I hadn't stopped doing the Roots, whatever, but I was listening to more of like the very deep underground lyrical stuff because that spoke to me more, kind of seemed more relevant to where I was. And I just wanted to get, I was spending a lot of time with Cole and Tabs and Diabolic, spending a lot of time with Tim and Herbs, Verbal Tap, Ambush, and Verbal Tech in Philadelphia because I started school at Hunter, Manhattan, and I switched to college in Philly. So, I was doing all those things and I wanted to I mean, I know it sounds like so almost corny now, idealistic. I wanted to be the absolute best lyricist I could be. I wanted to be a great classic hip hop lyricist that people quoted. I wanted to do that. I wanted to make great bars and write great songs and have great verses. And I was unpolished and raw and uneven, but I think some of it probably stood the test of time, at least in that genre, probably. So I mean, that's where my mind state was. Personally, where was I at? I had like a really tumultuous, you're very stereotypical, like high school relationship with like your ex at that point. Your girlfriend, then she's your ex, your girlfriend, then she's your ex. and I'd been in love with her since I was like 14 years old. And then like, we went to different colleges and, like we were back and forth with each other. She grew up like 2 blocks away from me. She was from like a really rich Jewish family and she was really pretty and like, like I was completely like smitten with her. But then I was also like an immature piece of shit and didn't know how to treat a woman or anybody at that point. So, I mean, this is very typical 19-year-old shit. You know what I mean? This is not new to me at all. But so there was probably a lot of like, there's probably some, like love sick stuff on there. Maybe I might have been uncompelling actually. The second at that point we were really like going the fuck through it at that point. But that's where I was, and we were doing a lot of live shows. Like we were doing like mini tours, like starting to like we hit New York, then we hit Boston, then we hit Philly. So like that's kind of like where I was. That's kind of like where I was at that point.
I know you mentioned how like the internet websites were reacting at that time, but how were the fans reacting to you? Like what were you hearing directly from them and how did it feel to be recognized on that level as a solo artist now?
To get like a little bit of shine, right? Yeah, no, it felt great. I mean, it felt incredible. It was everything at that point. It meant as much to me back then as making money did to me when I became like a weed dealer, which is like I mean, if someone knows me, they know what that means. Because like at a certain point, I know that we'll get there in the story, like money became everything to me, like, controlling a market, whatever. But at that point, um, like when I would do shows or people would, come up to me and whatnot and tell me like they really like the quotables, they like the bars. I had some really emotional writing on there, which I think resonated with some people about some of the things I said. And, like those are priceless memories, to be like 18, 19, 20 years old, be completely in love with what you're doing, your craft, making strides in it, even if you're far from perfect. And just kind of, you have that irrepressible, like, I can do this, like I could, this could really be something. Well, maybe I'm on my way here. Maybe I can get there.
Does it ever trip you out when you go back and listen to that album where like you feel like at that time you might have felt like you knew everything, but in retrospect you really knew
Oh
nothing?
yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. Yes, that's very prescient because especially again, like someone like me, people have told me consistently my entire life I'm extremely smart. I don't necessarily know if that's true. I mean, I think I'm like well read. I can memorize things quickly. I would beg to differ based on some of my life decisions. I think I've done like incredibly stupid shit. So regardless of the fact that I have a good vocabulary or I come off well in a conversation or whatever, just a glaring lack of judgment and common sense. So with that type of, I guess, superficial intelligence comes a lot of ego. I've always been told since I was a little kid, oh, you have such a high IQ, you're gifted classes, you're so far ahead of everyone. So I never did, one of the reasons I fucked off school, I never did any work and I coasted because I had this actual superiority complex where and I thought I was always thought I was the smartest person in the room. Which again, now at 44, you realize you're like, yeah, you're pretty fucking stupid if you ever thought that. You roll dumb, or you're in the wrong rooms, or both, a combination, A and B. You weren't that smart, and you're in the wrong room, so it makes you even dumber. 2 plus 2 equaling 4. But yeah, no, when I listen to that stuff, I'm writing like from this perspective of like wisdom and stuff like that. I'm like fucking 19 years old. Yeah, you're like, I got it figured out. Like I know the arc of my life at 19, like what's going to happen. Cause you got to remember, like at that point, I wasn't hustling. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't selling weed. I was barely even smoking weed. My friends were selling weed. I mean, I had a lot of people who were involved in like large scale or small, mid scale marijuana trafficking. It was just everywhere around me, Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia, where I went to college. It was kind of part of life, like the background. But, like, so I say all that to say this, which is that I had no idea how my life was going to turn out. I mean, look, man, I'll be honest. I wanted to be like Slug. I wanted to be like Aesop Rock. I wanted to get signed. Great. I wanted to get signed to Rhyme Stairs or Def Jux and spend the rest of my life on tour in a van with my friends. That was all I want. And to make cool songs and dope verses and get love for it and, somehow cobble together a living there.
Right, right.